we can get everybody seated, we're going to start our program. For those of you that I have not had the pleasure of meeting, I'm Susan Ungaro, president of the foundation here at the Beard House. And I want to welcome you to what we're very excited about the fact that we have this Enlightened Eaters program that we started actually about 2.5 years ago. And we've been on and off, and we're back on again strong with it, thanks to our colleague Chris Moon, who helped start it. And the idea of these special afternoon series is really to bring back the art of conversation about important issues in our food world. We have authors come for our Beard on Book series to talk about their books that they've written, memoirs, cookbooks. And then we want to also have people who can really help us think more deeply about how to eat better, not just dine on wonderful food, which we do over 220 days out of the year here at the Chain Spirit House, but we also really feel very strongly about the fact that we need to help Americans and the people in our community really think more deeply about the cliche, you are what you eat. So with that, I'm going to introduce Chris Moon, who will introduce our very special guest today, Dr. Finkelstein. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. As Susan said, thank you very much for being here. We are very excited that we are kind of relaunching our series here at the beginning of 2012, and no more fitting way, I think, than having Dr. Finkelstein here. It's the new year. People are focused on their health again. It's that time of year when people start reevaluating their diets and what they're putting into their mouth, and the concept of you are what you eat. So I think it's a really fitting start to 2012 for us to start with this program. Just a bit about Dr. Finkelstein. He's a board-certified internist and certified holistic physician whose Skillful living concept advises individuals to approach health and wellness as a wholly singular unit, from the food we eat to the relationships and careers we choose. So a truly holistic approach. Dr. Finkelstein hosts a number of mindful gardening projects at Sunraven, which is the medical facility in Bedford, New York, that he founded and presides over, and we'll hear more about that today. And at Sunraven, he has an expansive garden that he uses to cultivate fresh fruits and vegetables, and use those to illustrate how gardening is a powerful metaphor for how we can conduct our lives to achieve optimal wellness. So you'll notice the wonderful snacks today from Colorful Harvest, which the doctor will tell you a little bit more about, and we thank you for bringing them to us as well. But without further ado, here is Dr. Finkelstein.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Susan. Thank you all for being here, and of course for the James Beard Foundation for being what it is. As a physician, it is probably the most common question I receive, which is what is good for me to eat. I hear a lot of other questions. People have their specific ailments, and they want to know what remedies or solutions might be available. But food is clearly one of the most important subjects that we could discuss. And I believe with all the recent and evolving interest in culinary skills, and particularly with the food television programming exploding as I see it in the last several years, many more people are trying to make attempts to select and make food for themselves that are healthier. But the question I really think is most important is not what to eat, although that's critical, and eventually you need to get back to that. But the first question is, what is health? And how does food then support my health? And I think when you do that, and if you look at it from a holistic point of view, and I will define that in a minute, but if you look at it from a holistic point of view, you see health not just as a series of numbers and measurements, but as a vital, dynamic state of being, then you can see how food, and all sorts of food, even desserts, even caffeinated beverages, can fit into a healthy lifestyle. So when I work, and when I either teach people directly who come to me in consultation, or when I pick green tomatoes with them and show them what you can do with those, as opposed to just waiting for everything to be perfect, we can learn that perfection really isn't the goal, but that it's the living component that's more important. And that it's not then about either or. Because if we live our lives that there is perfect and there is best, and we see everything else we do that is not at that level, we can feel pretty poor about ourselves to begin with, and we can really lose the concept of what a healthy living is all about. So this is not about numbers. You can understand this in another way, that if you were a gardener, and I think many of you here might be, and you consider what it would take to grow the best quality vegetables possible. Quality not being just how they look, but how they taste, their nutrient value, the joy they bring to other people, the symbiotic relationship perhaps that those plants have with the other plants in your garden. When you think about your garden from that perspective, you realize that just having great looking tomatoes isn't the goal. That the sustainability of a project like that, particularly the life all around, requires real interest and dedication, commitment to cultivating everything around that particular plant. And the soil being a very important thing. So what I'd like to do is to boil this down where I can equate your health to what you understand as the requirements in a garden. So to use the garden as a metaphor, as Chris said, for how we can understand how to become as healthy as possible. And to sort of try to separate ourselves from the rules that we have learned from the medical mainstream. Because even though I think that Western medicine offers quite a bit, it's quite limited. And I think we all know that as well. So just to give you a sense of my background, just to sort of add some credence to that comment, I was the medical director of a hospital. I was practicing internal medicine for 20 years. I was the assistant director of the Department of Medicine at Lenox Hill Hospital here in New York City. I sort of achieved, if you will, certain qualifications, and I ascended to certain places where I understood the workings of the medical system. And I did my best to practice medicine. But I got to a point where I realized that as good as I thought I was at what I was doing, and when people came to me and I labeled them with a condition, that their first reaction was to pull back. There was a lot of fear and anxiety, of course, at the time. But then they wanted the quick fix. They wanted it out of their system. They wanted it out of the body. When that wasn't necessarily always possible, both the patients that I saw and me became very frustrated that there wasn't necessarily more that I could offer that I learned in medical school. And so with all that frustration and with the burgeoning development of information technology where people were now much more exposed and had opportunities to hear about alternative approaches, because I didn't learn about any of those at that point, I felt unequipped to really do my best job. So I went back to school. And I went back to school to study integrative medicine, which is a popular or rising in popularity specialty, if you will, of medicine, which is where somebody considers all the possible approaches, not just Western medicine, that might be applicable. And the word holistic is evolving further to, instead of being alternative, to really being a concept where everything is put into the pot. And when I say everything, I don't mean the solutions, like acupuncture and food and relaxation therapies and meditation. I mean, what's put into the pot is all the elements of a person's life. The verb living is entered into the equation, so that I care as much about somebody's relationships as I do about their cholesterol. I care as much about what they're doing in their lives as far as how they spend their day, whether it's working in a job or raising a family or reading books or volunteering, but are they pursuing their passions? I care just as much about that as whether or not they live to be 85 or 95 or 105. So that to me, I ask the question, well, how are you living? And the answer I receive back is the determinant of where to begin the conversation about how to take that person further in their living process to a place of greater health and vitality. Again, health being a verb, not a series of nouns, like what your cholesterol is, how much you weigh, how old you are, what your DNA shows. One day we'll all know our DNA and there'll be pictures on the wall of our kitchens. Is that health? No. Health is a verb. If you look at it that way, like the way you can look at your garden, it's a living entity and it's connected to everything around it. So let's talk about that a little bit. If you were going to plant a garden and you wanted to grow, let's say, a series of vegetables, let's just keep it simple that way, and you researched the seeds to buy, and you placed your garden in the right location on your property where it would get the proper amount of sun exposure, and you were living in a place that had reasonable climate and other ways, such as temperature and rainfall, you would be doing pretty well. But if you did not tend to your soil, and you put those seeds in a soil that was really not well tended to, nothing would grow, or you would have a lot of weeds. And so if you think of your health in a similar way, and you're listening to all the advice of experts, you're picking the seeds of all the vitamins and supplements, let's say, and you're considering, activity, where you're located, where you live, what job you work in. But you're not taking care of the soil, fertility, the essence of your mind, body, spirit in total. You can put all that in, and you won't necessarily get too far. Because in fact, if you can't convert that, and you can't grow, then ultimately all the good information and all the good research is not going to really manifest as something that you think you really want. So what's, I think, vital in understanding our health is that we have to take care of the soil of our selves. And the soil is a mind, body, spiritual concept. Forgetting the words, because people get hung up sometimes in some of those words, but it's everything has to be thrown into it. In your soil, in your backyard, everything is there. You can't say, well, I like the amount of nitrogen in here if it's filled with too much calcium, because just having the right amount of nitrogen isn't enough. And so everything has to be attended to. The problem with Western medicine is it pulls the body apart into different pieces. Even the problem with some alternative and holistic practices is that the way people practice, not necessarily the concepts themselves, the way people practice is to pull the body apart. I go to a chiropractor for my back and neck, and I go to an acupuncturist for my, sleep. I go to take supplements so that I don't get, infections. Those are all perhaps individually good ideas, but if they're not pulled together, and if somebody doesn't consider what else is important in the soil, specifically boiling it down to the quality of their relationships, how they're relating to other people, are you really healthy? So here's a classic example. In November every year in New York City, there's a marathon, and there's 40,000 people these days running that marathon. Well, on one level, these people look healthy, right? And if you run a marathon, you're in pretty good shape physically. But what if I tell you that most of those people, probably in the course of their training, are very difficult to live with? Because what they have to do to achieve that type of performance is give up a lot of things, and when people do that, they become somewhat resentful and irritable. And I think we all know that from our own experiences when we put our head down to achieve something. And so I wouldn't say that those people are really healthy. If they come home and are fighting with everybody who lives in their house, then their dynamic balance, their total health, isn't really in the best shape. Now, they might, any of us, could choose to pursue an endeavor for a short period of time and get away with it. But the idea of health is, this is a long distance run, longer than 26.2 miles, longer than 26.2 years. This is our lifetime. And think about it, if we wanted to run the marathon, we would read books on how to train, we would read different opinions about what to eat, but everyone agrees I think you have pasta the night before. You get all this information and then you train and you get good at it. If you want to play tennis, and you were serious about playing tennis and you wanted to get to the Australian Open, you would practice, practice, practice. You would hire a coach, you would eat right, you would rest properly, you would do everything that you could possibly do. If you wanted to be a chef in the kitchen and clean up the glassware that just fell, you would sort of study culinary skills, how to use a knife, how to cook vegetables, how to boil water. I mean, these are all things that you would do. How many of us spend an ounce of energy compared to those sorts of endeavors on figuring out how to live our lives? That's the most important job we have. That's the most important endeavor that we pursue. Do we really have the skills to live? And I think a lot of us do well, and we have reasonable role models in our life that we could look at to guide us. But the fact is that we don't necessarily pull this all together as one concept. I don't know that there are that many books out there that you could just pick up and sort of helps you develop the skills for living. And so, to me, the first thing to do is to use an organizing principle like a garden. What does it look like? What does it feel like to be living well? And so, getting back to your health then, so what's the soil equivalent in your health? And soil equivalent in your health is everything that you're planting those seeds into. The seeds of thoughts, the seeds of ideas, the seeds that create passion and the pleasure of congregating with other people. And so how do you receive that? How do you cultivate soil? And for me, it clearly involves the body. We need to work and get our body in reasonable shape.